Welcome to the Modern Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Pardee. This podcast, along with my private practice in LA and my newsletter, all are aimed to providing you evidence-based information around preventative medicine, longevity, and health in general. Join me in dispelling health myths as well as cutting through the noise that is social media. I hope that whether you want to optimize your performance or just in general get healthier, the Modern Wellness Podcast will help you do that. Today I'm joined by Dr. Joe Zundell, who is an educator and well-published cancer biologist. His research focuses on the metabolic and epigenetic mechanisms which promote cancers with the intent to provide better treatment in the clinic. After losing his mother to cancer at a young age, Dr. Zundell is leading a movement to embolden others with an effective biological education within a system that provides more confusion than it does clarity. His mission is to provide his education in cancer biology to open-minded individuals, enabling implementation of better choices to reduce cancer risks. Today we talk about cancer prevention strategies, the most modifiable factors there are in cancer, some social media myth busting, of course, and a lot more. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for coming today. I'm a huge fan of your Instagram. We're going to put his link down below. You always have great content, and I feel like you might be equally as frustrated with social media as me,
Probably, yeah.
potentially.
Yeah. Hey, Mary, how's it going? Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here on your podcast.
I'm excited. This is a topic that I haven't covered yet. And with your expertise, I think you're the perfect person for it. And I just want to dive in, but like starting high level. When people think about cancer, I feel like oftentimes people think about it as bad luck or something that, there can be nothing done to prevent it. How much of cancer is actually modifiable versus purely genetic?
Yeah, so this is a super good question because, firstly, I like the way that you said, I like how you phrase this question as saying modifiable instead of environmental versus genetic, which is what people typically say. Um, but I would say when it comes to cancer, typically the modifiable factors that we can change in our environment are contextual, obviously, between where we live, our actual environments, but anywhere from 50 to 90%. And a lot of this is going to depend on our socioeconomic status and our availability to resources that will help embolden our good health outcomes, as we'll discuss more about what those are in this episode. And typically, most cancers, when we think about the genetic contributions of cancers, and what we mean by that is heritability. So, like, are there mutations that come with birth of a child that predispose them to cancer? And there's a lot of different types of mutations that can, and typically that accommodates, give or take, about 10% of all cancers. But again, this doesn't mean that there isn't both a genetic and a metabolic and an environmental component to cancers. There's a lot of interplay between those two factors as diseases originate and then develop.
So you're saying 50 to 90% are modifiable
Yeah,
factors.
give or take. And again, I want to be clear that it's going to depend on a person's environment as to what they can specifically modify. Because I can tell somebody who has a genetic predisposition to alcohol consumption, hey, just put down the alcohol. But it's going to be more challenging for that person than maybe somebody who has an easier time putting down alcohol to cut out alcohol consumption.
Just where you're born, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So I can tell somebody, go receive an education. But if you're in an environment, and I grew up in a similar environment, it took an extreme amount of effort to get out of poor socioeconomic status to be able to receive an education. But I can't just tell somebody who grew up out in the middle of the woods like me with no money and barely any food to just go pick up textbooks and receive a good education.
we don't think about socioeconomic status enough. We don't talk about it enough on social media for sure, but as being a huge contributor to health outcomes.
Yeah. And I feel like everybody who understands the importance of socioeconomic status in helping to enable people's health decisions talks about this frequently. Maybe they just
Mm.
don't do it online, but for me, I talk with people regularly throughout my career, and this has always been something that's been at the forefront of our minds, trying to make, what we do accessible to people and as many people as possible within our given our given areas. But for whatever reason, people on social media just want the same regurgitated information over and over and over without actually comprehending the nuance and details that typically come with things like socioeconomic status or actually understanding cancer metabolism, for one.
Let's do it.
So
Let's do
let's
part
do
of it
that
at
here.
least. We're going to do a little bit.
Yeah.
When you think about cancer prevention, what do you think that the public misunderstands the most about it?
I think, especially now, we live in a society where social media just kind of runs pretty much
Mhm.
everybody's interpretations of society. I think people have this generalized assumption that they can just biohack their way into good health outcomes. And so you'll see a lot of advice online that's just like, or even just very simple articles in New York Times or wherever news outlet people are familiar with, just saying things like, eat this specific diet or take this particular supplement and use my discount code. And it's just this overwhelming amount of information that can be well intending, but often lacks appropriate nuance and context for a person in their specific environment to actually be helpful. Because again, you can tell somebody, take this supplement, take vitamin D, take, what is it, mitolithin A or whatever, something like that.
Urolithin.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned before about 50 to 90% of cancer is modifiable. Are there certain cancers where preventative strategies are stronger, meaning that they have a bigger effect compared to other cancers? And if so, like a couple of the ones that are more modifiable?
Yeah, that's a tricky question to answer because it's always going to depend on context, right? But there are certain modifiable preventative strategies for cancers that come to mind, specifically for things like colorectal cancer. So, I've spoken often on my page about the importance of fiber consumption. I don't think people are consuming enough soluble fiber sources, things like psyllium husk, um, which can help to reduce chronic unresolved inflammation in our GI, our gastrointestinal tract. Um, because if that inflammation goes unresolved, it can create potential issues for polyp formation and eventually colorectal cancer can form from that consistent damage that comes with excessive inflammation. And when I say inflammation, I want people to understand that it's very, very specific types of inflammation because that word is typically thrown around as this blanket term that is oversimplified. That means thousands and thousands of diverse interactions depending on a tissue with various secreted molecules that have, again, thousands more different functions and recruitment strategies and things like that too. So fiber comes to mind. Lifestyle factors or dietary factors? Is that what you're curious about?
Well, I was actually curious because we're going to go into those next, but I'm actually curious about are there certain types of cancers that are more heavily influenced from the modifiable factors versus some cancers that are much more heavily genetic?
Yeah. Um, so there's a lot of blood-based cancers that are often intrinsically genetic, things like AML, ALL,
Hmm.
and even some cases CLL. So a lot of blood-based cancers, there's a lot of genetic components to it. And even colon cancer, it's a little bit more rare, obviously, but there's a condition called Lynch syndrome
Hmm.
where there's mutations in specific DNA repair enzymes that can lead to basically chronic inflammation. So people that have this rare condition of HNPCC or Lynch syndrome, they will basically need to consume excess amounts of soluble fiber throughout their life. Yeah, to help
Yeah.
reduce risks of colorectal cancer. But with AML and blood-based cancers, there's a lot of genetic contributions there. Even neurological cancers, neurodevelopmental cancers like brain cancers, there's a strong genetic component there for children.
It sounds like it changes based on the cancer. It's not that all cancers are going to fall under that 50
Yeah,
to 90%. It's going to fluctuate depending on which is for every disease, right?
yeah.
When it comes to those modifiable factors, let's start with diet first. But if you had to name like the top 3 diet changes that have the strongest evidence for reducing overall cancer risk, and I know this might be, dependent on the cancer, but
Right.
what are like the top 3 that kind of come to mind? Bang for your buck.
Okay, so just to start, I just mentioned it, fiber. So we're going to
Yeah.
start with the easy one. And I already mentioned mechanistically how that can work regarding inflammation. The second one is
Well, I'm gonna double tap on fiber before we go because I think
go
this
for it.
is, yeah, psyllium husk is one of my favorite supplements. I don't have many of them, but I think it's one of the most underutilized things that we have. Um, and when it comes to fiber, the there's also the overarching category of fruits and vegetables,
Hmm.
right? And so when we talk about fruits and vegetables reducing the risk for cancer, how much of that is from the fiber versus like the phytonutrients or other aspects of fruits and vegetables?
I mean, I can't give you specific percentages.
Yeah.
I want to be clear, I'm not a nutritionist. I don't know all the things that fruits and veggies can do to help embolden health outcomes and reduce cancer risks, but fiber is definitely a strong contributor. But as you mentioned, there's a bunch of other things in foods, not even just fruits and veggies, that we need to understand how they can help us, achieve good health. Um, but yeah, so it's a bunch of phytonutrients, antioxidants, those sorts of things that can also be beneficial alongside the fiber in a nutrient-rich and diverse diet. So it's not just, there are people that can consume a vegetarian diet and live healthy, long lives.
The average American consumes between 10 to 15 grams of fiber per day. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. And I believe the last time I checked the stats, I think the greatest reduction you'll see from a fiber perspective for cancer risk is like 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. So almost double what
Yeah.
the average American is consuming.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen those dose-dependent relationship studies. They're pretty well designed as well.
Yeah, you can get benefits up to 40 grams of fiber per day, which is really hard to do. I do a lot of diet recalls with people.
Yeah.
Very few, if any, people are getting that much fiber if they're not supplementing with it. And I can almost guarantee you at that level, you're going to have gas and bloating and some
Yeah.
GI stuff that come along with it.
There's a lot of nuance here. When we tell people to consume more fiber, there's a threshold, right? You can have too little of something, you can have too much of something. You want to test the waters when you're consuming different fibers. You can have soluble fiber, but if you have somebody, that has intestinal issues, like myself, I'm pretty sure I have undiagnosed irritable bowel. So I need to be very careful about the amount of fermentable foods that I eat, which, comes down to that fruit discussion as an example. If I consume a lot of fruits and veggies that have fermentable carbohydrates in them, it's going to give me problems.
Yeah, great points. Besides fiber plants, what are other things that stick out from a dietary perspective for cancer prevention?
Yeah, and it's a pretty obvious one is the lowered consumption, if not no consumption of ultra-processed foods.
Mhm.
In our society, it's really easy to get access to ultra-processed foods. It's kind of normalized. But if people can refrain from consuming them as much as possible, that's going to be beneficial, not even just for cancer risks, but overall general health. There's something to be said about how happiness and mental health plays a role in our overall good health. Um, and I think it's challenging, but people need to determine their balance associated with consuming foods that they really enjoy that may be ultra processed, but trying to find that balance where they're not consuming too many of them to give severe health issues. Yeah. So
And
UPFs, fruits and veggies, fiber um, are some big ones when it comes to cancer risk reduction.
great. And when you think about ultra processed foods, is it more the glycemic response from them? Is it a combination of different things in terms of like risk for overeating and obesity? Or what do you think the main
It's
component is there?
a lot. It's basically all of those things. It's the
Hmm.
ability to consume a lot of them because they are hyper palatable. So you can anyone who's been to McDonald's, anyone who's had a pint of Ben and Jerry's in one sitting, which again I've done somewhat regularly, which I should probably not admit on a podcast, but sometimes you're in that dirty bulk and you're trying to gain muscle mass and you need energy quick, so you consume that Ben and Jerry's pint. Um, so it could be something like glycemic index. It could be, increasing prevalence of obesity and diabetes, which are direct contributors and definitely high risk for at least 13 different types of cancers, diabetes and obesity specifically. Um, but it's also that they're not very nutrient rich. So they might have a ton of added sugars in them and zero fiber and zero protein. So like anybody who's eaten Gushers that grew up in the 90s, uh, actually have some downstairs.
Ooh.
But they sell them in the small bags compared to in the 90s when they gave us like the little rippable pouches that had like 30
Hmm.
of them in there. Now there's like six in one small bag. So portion control, that can also help. But yeah, so a lot of it is nutrient poor foods like Gushers. If I go downstairs and I eat 50 packs of those Gushers, it's essentially just added sugars. So it's primarily just a shit ton of glucose at one time. And so that's going to stress out organs like the pancreas, the liver, kidneys, and potentially increase risks for those types of cancers.
It says something about branding and nostalgia when I know exactly what the Gushers packets felt like.
Yeah.
Like I think that they were like that matte, like
Yeah.
do
They
you
were
know what
like
I'm
this
talking about?
metal like paper, but they were matte
Yes.
on the front. They were
Yes.
smooth, man. That was psychological calculation in terms of like the pleasure you get from ripping that paper. They knew exactly what they were doing, man.
It's like imprinted in my brain, that whole process and what it looks like. I'm a big I like sugar a lot, so this is near and
There's nothing wrong with liking sugar, and we're going to talk about that
yeah.
more here too. And it's just like I think this prevalence of demonizing sugar as a whole carbohydrate group online is a bit ridiculous. I think oftentimes people hyperfixate on macromolecules. There's obviously a hyperfixation on protein. There's a hyperfixation on carbohydrates. There's a hyperfixation on fats. Not all fats are bad. There are fats within lean fishes that are good for our health. Omega 3s come to mind.
Absolutely. I really cognizant of all the dogmas that are out there, and I think you spoke to it really, really well, where we need to look at things from a broader lens. We often will talk about red processed meats when it comes to cancer.
Mhm.
What is it more red meat? Is it more processed meats? And what about that is increasing cancer risk if it is?
Yeah. So it appears to be both. Um, I will say that there's a slightly greater risk when it comes to the consumption of processed meats and cancer risks relative to the consumption of just red meat, in particular lean red meat. So people can consume lean red meat in a safe way so long as they have a nutrient diverse diet, such that they're not just consuming lean steak all the time, that they're diversifying their protein sources and consuming other things, but they can eat those safely. But the studies have shown that when a person consumes excess amounts of red meat and in a nutritionally poor diet that doesn't have sufficient fruit and vegetable intake or nutrient quality, that they have increased cancer risks. And the same is true when, in a dose relationship perspective regarding processed meats, largely due to high salt content, sometimes poor meat quality, um, and also some preservatives that are often required to ensure that that product is shelf stable for an extended period of time. So that way our economy can flourish without having to throw everything in the trash all the time. So there are trade-offs to adding preservatives to food, and in this case, it can increase cancer risks in the case of processed meats. But again, this doesn't mean that people cannot safely, quote unquote, safely incorporate processed meats like deli meats into their diet.
When we talk about processed meats, how much of it is, are you referring to the nitrates in
Yeah.
them potentially? And, you always will see like packaging that says nitrate free or something like that. Is there any merit to that? Or are they substituting it with something that's very similar? Or will it reduce the risk to choose those that are nitrate free?
Um, it will likely reduce the risks if it's nitrate free, but the degree of that depends on how much of it a person is eating. So it's back to that dose relationship related to meat consumption or red meat consumption. Um, and then the other thing that is a direct carcinogen related to red meat, because people typically grill them, or even proteins in general will do this. You can induce carcinogen formation by making, heterocyclic amines or polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Big words, jargon, nobody really needs to pay attention to them. But basically, when you use a lot of high heat on red meat or a various type of protein, you induce the formation of these carcinogens, which obviously, if you consume a bunch of them over time, you increase cancer risks.
So avoiding high heat grilling, like anything basically that would cause that like black char on the
Yeah,
outside of
yeah.
meats.
And that's a sad state of reality because I don't know if you're like me, and I know a lot of people listening might be. I the best way to cook a steak is medium rare. So with that char on the top, it's perfect with a good amount of salt and pepper, and that's it. That's a perfect steak. Again, you can consume those things to minimize cancer risks. Just be cognizant of the amount that people are consuming. Is really just how we reduce that. It doesn't mean, again, from a happiness and psychological and mental health perspective, I refuse to give up that medium rare ribeye.
Yeah.
Like I refuse to do it.
I think I'm on that same boat with you. It's my if I have one favorite meal, it's a ribeye, medium
Yeah.
rare too. Alcohol.
hmm
So big in the press right now because we talked about it with the dietary guidelines that just came out, which we're not going to cover on this podcast, but alcohol in general is very commonly consumed. I feel like it's very socially accepted, and I think um, it doesn't get as much bad press as it probably should. But let's talk about that when it comes to its link with cancer. Is there a safe amount? What actually causes the increased risk from alcohol?
So I just want to keep this simple for people.
Hmm.
Alcohol is a carcinogen, whether it's from beer, hard liquor, wine. It is a carcinogen, and if you consume enough of it over time, 1 drink a day to 2 drinks a day, you will increase your absolute risks depending on your sex, anywhere from 1 to 5%, give or take. Now, that might not be a big number for most people, but that's absolute risks. So, the absolute risk of cancer in my lifetime, on average, is maybe about 16 to 15% with all of the stuff that I've got going on average for specific types of cancers, as an example. Cumulatively, as an absolute, not a relative, an absolute in the entirety of my lifespan. And if just drinking alcohol adds anywhere from 1 to 5% of that, that's a lot. And so, no, there is no safe amount of alcohol consumption. But again, the reason it doesn't get bad press often, or not enough people speak about it, is because it's so socially acceptable.
Hmm.
I drink alcohol occasionally. I've admitted this many times on podcasts. I have no shame in drinking alcohol. I enjoy it. Again, mental health, psychological health, but I don't need it. And I do my best to minimize it. And I'm maybe privileged and lucky that I don't have a dependency issue. I don't feel the need to come home and drink. But a lot of people struggle with it. And so the more that people drink obviously comes with increased cancer risks, but it doesn't mean that, again, just like with red meats or anything in life, doesn't mean that people can't enjoy specific things. They just have to understand the risk associated with them.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and you put it in a really interesting way. So your lifetime risk around 16%, but adding 5% onto that is really significant when you look at absolute risk, going from, let's just say, 16% to 21% with just alcohol is the only changed factor there. And you're not talking 8 drinks per day, right? You're talking just a couple of drinks for a male.
For males and females. It
Yeah.
seems that the data shows that females might exhibit increased risks if they
Hmm.
tend to drink more relative to men, which is actually not what I would have thought.
And for alcohol, the main mechanism is going to be that it's an actual carcinogen,
Mhm.
and is it more the acetaldehyde that's there?
Yeah, so alcohol is metabolized in a two-step process in the liver. And in that process, you produce the formation of an acetaldehyde, basically. And it can form like a formaldehyde-like structure, paraformaldehyde-like structure in the liver. And if it's not cleared quickly in a way, it can cause liver damage over time. So because this is a two-step enzymatic reaction, um, if you have excess amounts of alcohol and you have that ethanol going into the first step, which I think is alcohol dehydrogenase, and then aldehyde dehydrogenase. And if you have a bunch of alcohol going in, that enzyme, that first enzyme has a specific rate at which it can metabolize the alcohol into the acetaldehyde. And then that second enzyme also has a specific rate. If one of them is backed up, there's going to be a buildup of one of the substrates in between, and that particular substrate can cause liver fibrosis and liver damage over time.
Tissue damage, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, why liver cancer, for one, pancreatic cancer, another, is strongly linked to alcohol consumption. And these things don't happen overnight. The liver is an extremely metabolically malleable organ, and from a health perspective, it can repair itself. So it can deal with a lot of these stressors over time, but consistent stress via things like alcohol consumption can lead to the development of hepatocellular carcinomas, or liver cancers specifically. But you don't just get cancer overnight. So you'll get, fatty liver disease or steatotic lesions, and then those lesions can lead to inflammatory issues and basically just metabolic disruption of the liver. And then that can lead to things like cirrhosis. Again, these things don't happen overnight. It's a snowball effect. So
The progression.
yeah, so people can stop drinking and their liver can repair itself. It can't reverse the damage depending on how bad the damage is, but it can repair tissue that hasn't been severely damaged. And I think people need to understand that if they're in a particular way of their life where they're experiencing liver health issues and it's directly related to alcohol consumption, just start reducing the consumption. It's going to be beneficial.
Absolutely. At any point, no matter what.
Yeah.
Physical activity. So I talk a ton about exercise.
Yep.
How would you talk about physical activity in terms of its effect from a biological perspective on cancer reduction? How does it actually work in terms of why does
Yeah.
exercise reduce your risk?
Yeah. So one of the mechanistic ways, amongst the many mechanistic ways, and just to simplify this such that people can understand, is that it basically emboldens our immune system. So our immune system is tightly linked to skeletal muscle contractions. And so if we're working out safely and consistently, I want to emphasize that safely exercising and consistently exercising over time, we're helping to sustain and maintain the health of our skeletal muscle and even build muscle in some cases, which helps to basically regulate the flow of our lymphatic fluid, which runs through the muscle tissue. The contractions of muscle actually pump the lymphatic fluid throughout our bodies in the same way that the heart pumps our blood, but our muscles, or our lymphatic system doesn't have a heart to pump it, so muscle pumps the lymphatic fluid movement. And so that, if we focus on muscle health, it can help to increase the potential, not always the ability, of our immune system to function correctly. So that's one of the primary reasons. And we see that in a lot of cancer cases. There have been a lot of really interesting studies to try and tease apart specific mechanistic details about, the various proteins that immune cells might secrete that in the case of a specific type of cancer, when you add something like exercise, what is exercise doing to the immune system, and how is that immune system component helping to reduce the development of a specific cancer type. And a lot of the studies show that there are specific cytokines and proteins secreted by immune cells when you add exercise into a cancer patient's regimen. And even in preclinical studies in mice, which they literally put mice on little treadmills, which is kind of cute, to relieve their cancer symptoms. They discuss and study specific mechanistic details about how the immune system can help reduce the cancer in those models and in humans.
And we'll hear sometimes when you hear about cancer treatments, something about natural killer cells. And I think that's one of the ones that's going to be elevated when you exercise. And you said it really beautifully when you started, where it's consistent exercise. So if you're consistently exercising, will it have an effect on those natural killer cells? And what does that look like?
Yes, vaguely. Just because natural killer cells are a pretty integral part of your innate immune system. So our immune system is separated kind of very basically into two segments. It's the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. So innate immune cells can be like NK cells. It can be myeloid cells like macrophages, neutrophils, eosinophils, so on and so forth, platelets, those sorts of things. And then the adaptive immune response would be things like B cells that make antibodies, T cells, which are kind of like the adaptive immune responses, NK cells.
Mhm.
Someone who's an immunologist that listens to this is going to be pissed that I said that. Sorry, not sorry, but just trying to simplify it for people. But yes, to put it short, yes, you would increase NK cell maybe abundance and activity acutely, um, but it would be resolved. And this is why, like, we've emphasized the importance of safety and consistency in exercising because, you can have too much of a good thing, like I've said. If you exercise too frequently and you're promoting significant muscle damage, it can cause issues over time. So you want to be able to rest when you need it, understand that you need rest and not let your ego get ahead of you, and actually enable your immune system to help you achieve good health,
Yeah.
starting with
And
NK cells as a precursor, maybe.
yeah, and I have a few patients who probably edge on the over exercising, but I would say majority of people are in the under exercising group. So important to do it safely because if you are under exercising and then you go try to go 120%, then you're probably going to be out for a few weeks, which you could have been exercising at a lower intensity for.
Yeah.
Otherwise, mechanistically, I think it's important that people just kind of like understand like what, because we always talk about exercise is good, but I feel like when people know more of the specifics about like why exercise is good, it really helps me, I should say, solidify why I do something. So you mentioned like the immune system being a big part as well.
So even just from a metabolic perspective, right? So like
Yeah.
if we talk about just the immune system, yes, the immune system is great. Yes, it's linked to lymphatic fluid movement. Muscle contractions are linked to lymphatic fluid movement. Um, but the other edge of the sword, I guess, so to speak, about this is the metabolic balance that is achieved through consistent and safe exercise. So it helps to enable our body to use resources in a more efficient way, as opposed to if we lead a sedentary lifestyle, obviously that's a big contributor to cancer risks if we're very sedentary. The way that our body metabolizes the things that we eat will change to accommodate the amount of energy that we're putting into moving as human beings throughout our environments. And so if I'm not eating in a way to accommodate my energy levels, or I'm excessively eating and I'm not expending enough energy, in the absence of appropriate nutrition, my liver in particular, my pancreas, the things that help me respond to the consumption of food and digest it appropriately are going to be impaired over time. So,
And just improving insulin sensitivity as
yeah,
well,
exactly.
which is like what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
then the reduction of inflammation that happens with exercise. I know that's an overused term, but I think it actually applies to exercise. When we look at chronic exercise, acutely you'll get a little bit of an inflammatory response if it's more of a high intensity, but long-term reductions in certain inflammatory markers, is that a part of
That's just a
how it
natural
works?
thing. So I can tell
Hmm.
you, and everybody who's listening right now has some level of acute inflammation. So when
Hmm.
we think of inflammation, there's acute and chronic, but there's also different types of inflammation. If we separate it again into two categories, there's response to pathogens and there's response to damage. The way that our immune system responds to damage is different than the way that it responds to pathogens. Pathogens, I mean like viruses, bacteria,
Hmm.
fungi, protists. When it comes to exercise, it induces some level of damage. It's not, hopefully, it's not the type that's like actual damage. It's basically stretching, contraction, which initiates the immune system to recognize that tissue in a way that says, hey, I'm over here working. I'm exhibiting some level of stress, and I need assistance from the immune system to be able to respond to the stress that's within the particular muscle tissue and potentially repair it and help it build. So it's this massive orchestration of not only our immune cells but other cells that enables muscles to build as we're working out. And of course, if you have somebody who's working out too much and they end up damaging, like physically damaging, mechanically damaging that muscle tissue, that inflammatory response that was once adaptive and progressive becomes maladaptive. So again, everything in life has this homeostasis or balance. And if we go too far off the deep end, we're going to have problems. If we go, into too shallow waters, so to speak, we're going to have problems. So it's always about maintaining this balance. That balance shifts over time, and it's hyper variable between people. So that's why it's important we try and, simplify this, but clarify just how complicated it is to understand all of these things, and truly we'll never understand it all. But we do our best as scientists.
What about sleep? What role does sleep play in cancer prevention?
Every single role. Sleep disruption is considered a carcinogen as well. Um, and we can talk about this briefly here, but there's strong links between sleep disruption and how our body's circadian metabolism can become messed up and lead to diseases like obesity and diabetes. Sleep disruption is causatively linked to obesity and diabetes. So you'll see
Mm.
this problem in a lot of shift workers, people that work in hospitals, people that are in the military, firefighters. They have a higher predisposition for diabetes and obesity just because they're messing with their body's normal physiological response of sleeping and wake cycles. So yeah, sleep disruption or circadian metabolic disruption is a carcinogen. I do want to add some clarity in this, in that when we say something is a carcinogen, it's often interpreted as though we go to this website called the IARC and we see class 1 and class 2. Those classes, there might be a class 1 carcinogen like alcohol, as an example, or tobacco smoking, as another example, that can be a class 1 carcinogen, just as sleep disruption might also be a class 1 carcinogen. But it doesn't mean that all of those things have the same level of risk. They're in the same group, but they don't have the same level of risk in terms of their ability to independently increase cancer risks. So I think people need to be clear in that as well.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. Thank you for making that. And sleep, it sounds like, is an independent risk factor aside from obesity that it could lead to, right? So you can have somebody who is not obese but has tons of sleep disruptions, and fixing those sleep disruptions may reduce their risk.
Yes. And it's not even about obesity and diabetes as an example. Sleep disruption can increase risks for diseases like Alzheimer's, neurological and
Mhm.
developmental disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders. Yeah, so it's really a lot of the things that I tell people when it comes to cancer risk reduction are realistically things that apply to most diseases, independent of their specific research articles that show causative link of X behavior or X nutrient or substrate to a specific cancer type. Because again, cancer typically, if we go back to our initial statement when we started the podcast talking about modifiable risk factors, cancer initially originates from our behaviors in our environment, and it's not usually genetic, although it can be
Mhm.
entirely
Yeah,
genetic.
yeah.
Yeah,
I want to go into some of those other environmental things, big ones that you think of, and I have some written down so I can seed you, but
sure.
like what are the big ones that we can actually, again, modify? So whether it's like water filters or testing your home
Yeah.
for radon kind of
Yeah.
thing. But what are the ones that you think of that are things that people can implement?
Yeah, I mean that's just it. And something that I've incorporated even in my own lifestyle is the implementation of specialized water filters. Obviously, wherever we live might not come with the most clean water supply. I don't think Durham, North Carolina, where I currently live, has the greatest water supply. So I've taken the liberty of getting, actually, one of my friends is the scientific director of Hydroviv, this company that makes specialized filters that you can install underneath your sink to purify out basically microplastics and other heavy metals and things like that. Yeah, so that's definitely a modifiable risk factor that people can implement into their lives, and it's pretty cost effective. So minimizing microplastic consumption is definitely one of those through specialized filters. What was the other one here?
I know you're not a water guy, so this may be completely out of your field, but if you've looked into it, like do you think that there's merit for reverse osmosis versus a Brita? You know, there's so many options when it comes to water filters, and the price point can differ pretty significantly. Do you have any input, or is that a separate
Yeah.
podcast?
It's just funny. I've kind of always considered myself a water guy
You're
or water boy, maybe. Just a joke. But no, yeah, that's funny, especially considering we're 70% water. But when it comes to reverse osmosis, yeah, I mean, a lot of those things can be helpful. But as a scientist, for me, the immediate thing that comes to mind is that any purification method is going to come with its trade-offs. Now, if you
Mhm.
link all of those in sequence along each other, let's say you run the water through reverse osmosis and then you run it through a PFAS filter, awesome. But like most people aren't going to be able to afford that level of purification strategy. We don't all have analytical chemistry labs in our kitchen that we can do like size exclusion or reverse phase on our water and getting a little nerdy here, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I am kind of a water guy because I deal with solvents a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Big water guy.
Yeah.
Arsenic in drinking water, I read, is a thing for us to think about, especially those people that have private wells, which I'm not a water girl, so I don't know a lot about water. But when I was reading that, I was like, interesting. My brain, when I think of somebody, if they just told me, I mean, this is completely layperson think, like this is not my category. But if you
Sure.
told me you had a private drinking well, I, for some reason, associate that with healthier water. And what came up in my research is that it's a higher risk for arsenic being in private wells. Have you heard of any of that or
Yeah,
any
no,
merit
I
to it?
yeah. So a lot of these things, these environmental exposures to well water, it's always going to depend on the environment that that well is in,
Mm,
and
right. That makes
whether or
sense.
not there are safeguards to filter that water before people are consuming it. So yes, yes, things like heavy metals in well water supplies can be a big problem. And
Hmm.
people who have private wells should get their water tested
Hmm.
regularly, not even just
Yep.
once. Like check it over time because obviously the environment changes over time. If somebody builds a community near you and they're not so careful about the waste supply that they're managing, they might leach something into the ground that ends up in your water supply. So you need to check those things regularly. And they're very cheap. You can go to Home Depot. They give you free stick tests all the time. When it comes to things like radon you mentioned earlier, before anyone buys a house, or even regularly if they own a house or a property, they should always get radon testing. So radon is a very dangerous radioactive isotope that is directly and strongly linked to the development of lung cancers. Currently, I'm working in the radioisotope nuclear medicine field. So we develop at my company, we develop targeted radiotherapies. So when it comes to radioactive isotopes, it's not worth the risk. Get radon testing. And essentially, this radon, this specific isotope of radon, is literally due to the degradation of uranium and thorium underground, which finds its way up through gas vapors and things like that that can end up in people's basements.
Hmm.
But if you
It's
don't have a basement, if
odorless.
you're a ground floor, get radon testing in your house before you move in, and have regular testing maybe annually.
Yeah, great. And a lot of states will actually pay for testing. Some have free testing kits as well. So you
Yeah.
can like just Google like radon testing
Yep.
California or Massachusetts, and there's usually links that will come up there. What about air filters? Do you have an air filter? You think they do anything? You think it's worth it?
Yes, absolutely. Again, in my own lived environment, I've got three cats currently, and we foster kittens occasionally. So, we've got a lot of litter boxes.
Yeah.
So I have air filters and purifiers by the litter boxes to help, one, regulate the smell, and two, affect or neutralize, hopefully, the amount of particles that are in the air. And this helps with the health of the cats as well, because I don't want them to get diseases just as I don't.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of positivity between air filters, and even on this notion, if people own homes or whatever, or they live in apartments, they should also check their air filters for their HVAC system, make sure that those are clean and changed out annually.
We didn't talk about sun, so I'm guessing that's on your list in terms of just like SPF
Yep.
for that, and then
Yeah.
obviously avoiding smoke, secondhand
Yep.
smoke. This is an interesting one because I've actually seen a resurgence of smoking in individuals my age, where it's like almost becoming cool again. I don't
Smoking cigarettes.
smoking cigarettes. I've also seen smoking, and I don't mean marijuana. I mean Like there's these boutique
Like
places in
spice.
California. Exactly, like they're rolling up like flowers and like different herbs and smoking them. And I feel like there's just a lack of understanding that any smoke inhalation is going to be a carcinogen. It doesn't matter if it's tobacco or if it's
It's just
whatever.
wild to me because, like, just to keep this clear, if people are not aware, and I'm not trying to be condescending, if you light something on fire
Mhm.
and you inhale that combusted material and it enters into your lungs, you will have problems over time. That's like a obvious thing that people should understand. One of the things that pisses me off the most about this particular trend is I do a lot of immunohistochemistry or histology in my line of work. So I look at cancer samples regularly, and lung cancer often comes up on the docket to examine that tissue. And you wouldn't believe how often I see black plaques in lung cancer patients. And it's directly because they're smoking. And it's so prevalent, it's shocking because we know that chronic cigarette smoke exposure leads to lung damage and predisposes people for lung cancer. So for me to see on my histology slides so often these black tar deposits in the lung and then a whopping beautifully stained piece of cancer tissue right next to it, it's like not only a proximity thing, but it's just an obvious phenotypic thing, visual thing that people can see that should be shocking enough to make them put cigarettes down or not inhale any combusted material. Again, you can enjoy a cigarette occasionally. Your body can deal with it. That's not what I'm talking about. I occasionally have a cigar, occasionally, but if you smoke for a long time, whether it's a cigar or if it's cigarettes, filter or no filter, it's going to increase your risk for lung cancer and physically add that plaque into your lungs that doesn't leave. It doesn't have a good clearance profile. It gets stuck in there. So,
I think you did a good job explaining that.
yeah,
I don't
sorry
want to
if I got
smoke
a
after
little
that.
passionate there, but
No, it's good. What are some cancer related claims on social media that concern you the most right now?
the one the ones that concern me the most are typically the ones that imply that we all have cancer cells within us.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that going away anytime soon. And I've tried my best to educate people on this that the potential for cancer doesn't mean that you all have cancer cells within you floating around that your body is just taking care of. The difference between healthy and cancer is is remarkably separated. You either have cancer or you don't. You don't all just have cancer cells floating inside of you all the time just because the potential for healthy to become cancer is there. Upon the same logical premise, everyone has diabetes, everyone is obese just because they have the potential for those diseases. Everyone's got Alzheimer's. Everyone's got parasitic and viral infections, but that doesn't mean that you always have the diseases that these things are associated with. It's when your body can't regulate the ability to neutralize those things that you develop those diseases.
Question, follow-up question is because I think when people say that, I think what they're trying to say is that you have cells that have mutations that have formed that if your immune system didn't clean them up would turn into cancer. Is that not true?
That is true, but that's
That is
not the
true.
same thing as
It's
cancer.
not totally.
Right.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
that's where this misconception arises is because
Hmm.
people they learn about the imperfections that come with biology. But that
Hmm.
same imperfection in biology is also the thing that drives the evolution of species. Many species have different predispositions for cancers. Some species, there's a species of clam that lives to like 800 years old that doesn't get cancer. There's species of whales, there's elephants that have significantly lower risk for cancers because of different adaptations and evolutionary considerations that they've developed over time. But the idea that life exists in a vacuum and everything happens perfectly all the time is absolutely absurd. And when
Hmm.
people learn about the imperfections associated with biology, that mutations can happen, they need to understand that that's natural. Nothing in
Mhm.
life can be so finely tuned that it is unable to adapt to the environment. There has to be some wiggle room.
Sweeteners. I'm a big Coke Zero fan.
Same.
And Sprite Zero, I didn't know existed until this year. Wow, changed my life. Because
Okay.
I can't do caffeine at a certain time. So,
That's
although there is
actually
Coke
that's really
Zero
smart.
caffeine free,
Yeah.
which is another option. But
Yeah.
anyways, my question is I'll crack open a Coke Zero and sometimes I won't have them on patient calls because inevitably somebody will say to me, I can't believe you drank diet soda. What are your thoughts? Am I killing myself? Am I dying right now?
No, artificial sweeteners are not killing people. Again, people can enjoy these things within reason. Artificial sweeteners are a tool, right, to help caloric expenditure, while still having that psychological happiness that you get from drinking a carbonated Coke beverage without the caloric intake of excess added carbohydrates.
Your perspective.
From a cancer
Artificial
perspective,
sweet artificial sweeteners. Yeah.
again, there's a risk with anything. Artificial sweeteners, you would need to consume enormous amounts for it to have real potent absolute risks, not relative risks, absolute risks. Now, if your whole diet is you come home, morning, lunch, dinner, whatever, and all you eat is like Diet Coke, artificial sweeteners is not the reason you'll get cancer or you'll die. It is
Right.
because, you haven't considered your overall nutrition. So I think people need to understand that Coke Zero can, like anything, fit into our diets in an appropriate place such that any harms that could possibly be perceived from artificial sweeteners are so negligibly small that they won't even be a consideration for diseases. And in general, the research has showed us that even in extreme preclinical studies where you give a disgusting amount of things like aspartame, the phenotypes that are seen in those mice are the origins of cancer. They're not like fully developed tumors. They're just like blanket terms for cancer. So, and going back to this as well, there are multiple events that are required to form a cancer. Like I said, it doesn't just happen overnight. You can have a mutation that can be detected in a cell, and then that cell can be eradicated and eventually go through apoptosis or cell death. But it's when those issues accrue, there's multiple hits, so to speak. This is like the two hit or the multi hit hypothesis that leads to the development of cancers. Even if somebody is consuming so much artificial sweeteners or aspartame or something like that, that it does, for whatever reason, cause some sort of harm, it's likely not going to be in a way that leads to the development of cancer. Your body will adapt to that and usually fix it. And this is why people need to understand like dose relationships between things like aspartame and how that obviously varies between, trying to compare it to something like cigarette smoke. One of those is way more dangerous than the other, even in minute quantities.
Or alcohol.
Yeah, or alcohol,
Yeah.
or radon,
Yeah.
or
Right.
any
Or being
radioactive
sedentary.
for
Yeah.
the
I
most
mean,
sedentary, sleep disruption.
yeah.
We could go on.
I know. That's where I see a lot of the time people that they don't I don't care if you drink Diet Coke, right? It doesn't matter to me. But people that like say it's terrible for you, but are those same people are also sedentary or they're also in tanning beds or they're like there's no weighing of actual risk that's happening there or drinking, there's it just doesn't make logical sense. So I want to do a quick like rapid fire round for
Sure.
the finale. And so
Yep.
I'm gonna throw some things at you in terms of cancer myths or truths,
Sure.
and you just tell me true, false, or you can say nuanced if you can't put it in that category.
Sure.
All right, here we go. Sugar feeds cancer.
Oh, truanced?
Truanced, got it. We'll take that. Cancer is primarily a metabolic disease.
Uh, truanced.
Supplements can meaningfully lower cancer risk.
I feel like all the answers to these will be nuanced or truanced.
That's
Uh,
surprising to me. So I would think that one would be false, but
it's mostly
or are
false.
you
I'll put it
thinking
that
about
way.
psyllium husk potentially?
Yeah. Yeah,
Fiber
or protein,
supplements?
like whey isolate or something like that, yeah. Generally, if we're thinking about, like, basic multivitamins or something like that, it's generally false, but if there's things that people are supplementing their diet as supplements, the term would
Mhm.
go. If they're supplementing their diet where they know that they have deficiencies or they need more of something, then it's likely beneficial, but this doesn't mean all supplements like urolithin A or
Right, or like an anti-cancer supplement, right? That has like
exactly. Yeah,
some yeah, okay, that makes sense.
yeah.
Um, Detoxes reduce cancer risk. Let's just say
I
like
think
detox teas and stuff, more
false.
on that category.
Yeah. Yeah, false.
Organic food dramatically lowers cancer risk.
False.
IGF-1 secretagogues. So we're going into the peptide world. I don't know if you know about it at all, but
Yep.
things like ipamorelin,
Mhm.
CJC, but these growth hormone secretagogues. Worries about increasing cancer risk with those.
Yes, true. Um, Again, specific cancers, liver, kidney, pancreatic, breast come to mind.
And to double click on that, do you think that also the FDA approved ones like tesamorelin, things that are used for like short stature, sermorelin, same risk with those as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But again,
Anything that's pushing IGF-1 potentially, right? Not
yes.
obviously it's not going to 100% of the time or they wouldn't be in existence, but things that you should think about them that they have risks potentially.
Yeah. So this with any treatment, just to keep this clear, there's always pros and cons arguments, right? So if somebody has a disease, there's a lot of IGF-1 inhibitors and things like that, and stimulants for a lot of cancer treatments that affect IGF metabolism. Generally, we want to inhibit it, but in general, it's always about a pros and cons with any treatment. So the pros always have to weigh out any cons.
If there's one thing that you wish more clinicians communicated to patients clearly about in terms of cancer prevention, what would that be?
Um, I admittedly I'm not a clinician, right? And I don't communicate with clinicians often, but one thing I'm finding that I could be wrong in is that cancer patients, and even from my own experience with my mom passing from cancer when I was young, in my own experience, oftentimes doctors don't have the time to explain, I think, sufficiently a patient's diagnosis and their treatment strategies and what the treatment is doing. So I've actually taken a lot of time out of my schedule, even more time than everything else that I'm doing, to try and talk to cancer patients where I can to explain what their chemotherapeutic regimen is doing from a mechanistic perspective and off target or side effects that they could be exhibiting and how they might be able to offset some of those side effects that just naturally come with the treatment because the treatment's going to do its job, but there's, again, pros and cons associated with that. So they need to be able to minimize the cons where they can and regulate the pros. So I do have a lot of conversations with cancer patients to kind of fill the gap where clinicians don't have often the time. Not that I have the time, but you know, we got to do the best we can. But I think
Yeah.
communicating with patients is definitely a need, and our healthcare system doesn't exactly make it easier for clinicians to spend the appropriate amount of time with their patients explaining what they need to so that they walk out of that very tough situation having a plan that they understand. And so again, comprehension is anything, is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. There's a lot of interesting research about aspirin and cancer. And clinically, we don't talk about it a ton because of the bleeding risk that it's associated with
Sure.
aspirin as well. But I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
So when we look at the overall research, aspirin appears to have the ability to reduce risks for colorectal cancers, largely through its ability to reduce and minimize chronic inflammation from people that struggle with inflammatory disorders in the intestinal tract in the colon. So that's the primary indication is colon cancer that aspirin appears to somewhat correlatively slash causatively decrease risks for because of those inflammatory contributions. But Again, it's always a trade-off. Not everyone should be consuming aspirin if they don't need it.
Right, right. And especially there's certain populations with higher bleeding risks where you really worry about the bleeding risk versus the benefit of potentially reducing the risk of cancer. You actually mentioned this syndrome when we first started in terms of genetic contributions to cancer, but Lynch syndrome, I believe, is one of the times that they're more likely to use aspirin for prevention just because that's such a high risk of colorectal cancer.
Yeah.
And then there is an algorithm to discuss with your doctor, but if your risk for ASCVD, like plaque formation in the arteries, is high enough and your risk for colorectal cancer is high enough, it actually may be something to discuss with your doctor whether aspirin is right for you or
Yeah.
not. But I would definitely have that discussion with a detailed risk benefit ratio because for a lot of people, the risk of bleeding outweighs the potential benefit of cancer
Right.
reduction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's always about those quality of life discussions too.
absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on. I know people are going to get something out of this, so I just appreciate all the prep and you showing up, and it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, well, likewise, and again, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on this podcast. It's a very high quality one. I think a lot of people should listen more to you, and I'll push your messaging where I can. Again, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Right back at ya.
Thanks.